It was the dawn of the third age of podcasting, 30 years after the series had launched.
The Babylon podcast was a dream given form. Its goal, to discuss the place where humans and aliens could work out their differences peacefully.
It's a port of call, home away from home for established fans, newbies, Jon, Blaine, and guests.
Humans and aliens wrapped in 2,500,000 tons of spinning metal, all alone in the night.
It could be a dangerous place.
Wait, what?
But it's our last, best hope for peace.
This is the story of the last of the Babylon stations.
The year is 2024.
The name of the podcast is
Babylon 5, 30 years later.
Hello and welcome back to another brand new episode of Babylon 5, 30 years later. This is a podcast looking at every episode of the hit classic science fiction television series Babylon 5, exactly 30 years after the episode was released. I am one of the voices guiding you through this journey, a voice in the wilderness, if you like. My name is John Wilson, and with me is Blaine Dowler. Hey, Blaine.
Hey, John. How's it going?
It is going well. You know, I'm a little bit tender in the face. Had a bit of a slugfest last night with this really tall guy, but you know, we ended up as friends, so it was okay.
Okay, well that's good. Did he also have purple bruises, but still somehow bleed white?
Yes, I just figured, you know, I don't judge. His biology is his, but yeah, he was definitely bleeding white, and maybe it's white when it's super oxygenated, but it's violet when it's inside. I don't know. But we are talking today about T.K.O, which is episode 14, I believe, of the first season proper.
That is correct.
And it was aired 30 years ago today, hence the name of the podcast, on May 25th, 1994. May 25th is sticking out in my brain. Is that Star Wars Day? I think...
Well, the fan-chosen Star Wars Day is May 4th, for May the 4th be with you, but a lot of Star Wars releases for some reason come out on May 25th, possibly for the Memorial Day.
So, yeah, it's the what is it, 17th anniversary of Star Wars, whenever this episode came out.
Mm-hmm.
They did not choose a theme befitting that event, but, you know, that's okay.
No, but to be fair, the people making the show did not choose this broadcast date.
True. So this episode was written, as almost all of them are, by J. Michael Straczynski, and John C. Flynn III directed this episode. Now, I was looking at John C.
This wasn't one of Straczynski's. This was written by Larry DiTillio.
It shows him on MDib as Straczynski.
And then DiTillio is listed as who's got story editor credit, but yes, it's DiTillio actually did the script.
So like I was saying, this is one of those episodes that J. Michael Straczynski didn't directly write, but Larry DiTillio wrote the screenplay for this one. And but John C. Flynn III was the director. He was a TV director who's directed episodes of shows of Magnum P.I., Jake and the Fat Man. He has credits going all the way back to... Well, a long way, actually, as I scroll back through here. The Flame is Love was a TV movie back in 1979. But I see him attached to Hawaii Five-0, Hill Street Blues, all these hit shows from when we were young. And still continuing to direct all the way up to 2015 with 7 episodes of Jane the Virgin.
Yeah. And to Babylon 5 fans, he's probably best known as the director of photography of every episode up to this point and most of those that follow.
Okay.
He was director of photography for 102 of the 110 episodes.
All right, so he is definitely somebody familiar with the show. He had been working with it for the run so far. And I saw him listed as director of photography for 2 of the films that we're going to be talking about way down the road, In the Beginning and Third Space. But yeah, so is this the only episode that he is director?
No, for directing credits, this is his first of 9.
Okay.
For Babylon 5.
Alrighty. Shall we get into the summary of the plot?
Let us do that.
So, as often happens with this series, we open with people arriving at the station. 2 plot instigators arrive chatting friendly enough. We have prizefighter Walker Smith and Jewish Rabbi Yosel Koslov. And they have been talking on the flight, they part ways and they start two separate storylines. Now, ostensibly the A plot, because it's the plot the title is named after, but in my mind on this episode it's not the A plot, is where Walker Smith, he is a friend of Michael Garibaldi. And as Garibaldi is on the station trying to stop a drug trade, one of the guys he's trying to take down is about to stab him, and Walker Smith walks up and beats the guy in the face, taking him down so that Garibaldi, doesn't get a hole in his back, which is pretty great. They're good friends for a long time. They know each other's pasts, although they haven't been in direct touch for a while, so they spent some time catching up. Turns out that Smith had been a prize fighter, and he was up for a title match. But the people who manage these things decided it was not time for him to go up for the title. So he should walk away and take some time and come back later. And Smith didn't want to do that. He wanted his chance to fight. So they framed him. They made it look like he was taking drugs and stimulations in the fights, and he lost his career. So he's trying to find his way back into the ring, back into public eye, just back into fighting, because that's what he likes to do. And there's this regular fighting match that happens. I don't know if it's always on Babylon 5 or if it's just on Babylon 5 this time, but it's called the Muay Thai, and it's a brutal blood fight. And so Garibaldi is not too enthused, because this is not just a prize fight with gloves and rules and a ring. This is like take your opponent down any way you can kind of fighting. And Garibaldi does not want Smith to get hurt. But he shows him the fight, and he shows him where the Mutari are fighting. And Smith rudely demands a place in the fighting, but he is rejected because humans aren't allowed. The Mutado is the person in charge of this, and Smith forces the issue with him, and the Mutado takes him down. So as Smith and Garibaldi leave, they part ways, kind of angrily, because Smith thinks that Garibaldi knew all this was going to happen. Smith is approached privately by another of the Mutari named Caliban. When I say Mutari is sort of a collective word for people participating in the fight or watching it. It's not a race name. There's people of all different races here. And so Caliban tells Smith that there could be a way for him to get in, but he's going to need to do it respectfully, not rudely as he was before. Later, Smith and Garibaldi go see a match featuring the Shorin, who is the best fighter in the Muay Thai. And after the fight, the Mutado says, is there anyone who challenges the Shorin? And Walker Smith says, I challenge him. And he does it respectfully, but he does challenge him in front of everyone. According to the rules, that's going to allow him a place in the fight. So he trains, he practices with Garibaldi and Caliban, and when it comes time for the fight, both the Shorin and Walker Smith give pretty well as good as they get. Each one of them is able to take the other down at some point, and ultimately the fight ends with both men exhaustedly slugging it out. Like, it starts with them doing very skillful technique fighting, but at the end they're exhausted, they're bloodied, and they're just throwing punches, trying to knock the other one down until they both hit their knees. So the Mutado calls a draw, and Smith is shown respect by the Shorin and by the audience, and everyone parts on good terms. Meanwhile, rewinding to the beginning of the episode, Rabbi Koslov has come to Babylon 5 to visit Susan Ivanova. Remember in an earlier episode, her father had died. It's been some months, and Koslov wanted to visit Susan. He's a friend of the family. He wanted to make sure that, her mourning, she was okay. Any cultural needs he could help out with have been met. She has not taken the time to sit Shiva, which is the Jewish mourning observance. And it's now been months. And so she's like, what would be the point at this point? But the rabbi is not convinced. And he goes and approaches Commander Sinclair about perhaps giving Ivanova a few days of leave so she can observe the traditional rituals. And Sinclair is all about it. Sinclair is yes, perfectly fine, take all the time she needs. So whenever Koslov approaches Ivanova and tells her about it at dinner, she does not appreciate what she sees as interference and control, and she gets angry and leaves. Sinclair calls her in his office and offers her a leave of absence. She refuses because she's choosing her duty, which is what she's been doing all of this time. But Sinclair, forces her to sit and talk, and they talk about her need to mourn and process her grief. But Ivanova stands firm on her refusal, so Sinclair does not push the issue. Kozlov later comes to her. They both apologize for how dinner went badly. He gives her what she calls her legacy from her father, which is a centuries-old family heirloom. It's a large samovar. That was her father's, and it goes all the way back to the time of the Tsars. So at least as far back as the early 20th century, probably farther. Later, Kozlov is preparing to depart the station. Ivanova is saying goodbyes, and she starts to remember the scene we saw with her father telling her he regretted not doing more to show her that he loved her. And that's been her big sticking point with her relationship with her father, is that she never felt that he showed her love. And on his deathbed, he pleaded with her to forgive him. And remembering this, she cries out to Kozlov, asks her to stay, asks her to help her sit Shiva. We do see portions of this gathering with the rabbi and Susan recalling memories and stories of her father. And it ends with her breaking down in tears while reciting a prayer. And after all of that is done, Kozlov departs again, but this time all of the tensions between him and Susan have been erased, and Sinclair is also present to see him off. And that is how the story ends. Just to spoil my hand a little bit, I found one plot line very, very touching and one plot line rather pedestrian. So you can guess which one is which as we go along. How are you feeling about this one?
About the same.
Okay.
So, not spoil things too much, but earlier in the season I mentioned that 3 of the 5 worst rated episodes by IMDb users are in this season.
Mm-hmm.
The second lowest score of the series was Infection, with a 6.4 out of 10.
Mm.
This is the only episode to rate lower than that, with a 5.8.
So this is the lowest episode of the season and therefore the lowest episode of the series?
It's the lowest rated episode of the series, and the gap between the worst and second worst is not very small.
Yeah.
And I'm with you in that the Ivanova plotline worked,
Mm-hmm.
but to me the Walker-Smith plotline, it didn't. Some of that I think were budget constraints because they just did not have the money to build an impressive fighting arena.
Right.
So they had a small elevated platform and tried to do it with lighting, which
neon lights
worked well enough. Yeah. And, the spotlights over them when they're in there. So it does feel a lot like a cinematographer solution. It was director John C. Flynn, who, as we said, is cinematographer and director of photography on most episodes. I think the ones he directs might be the only ones where he's not, or close to it. Actually, if he directs 9 and he's cinematographer on 102, there's one where he does double duty at least by the math. But I think, the ones where someone else steps up as DP are the ones where he's busy directing. It could have been better, but some of the issues, I believe, are on a script level.
Yeah.
We don't get a clear idea of the Wutai. We don't get a clear idea of who doesn't qualify and why the challenge needed to be issued that way. The way Caliban was shot, it seemed like he had some sort of nefarious plan getting Walker involved, but that didn't come. It was just everything about the introduction to Caliban made me feel like, okay, he's dirty, he's setting this guy up for something, but no. So I don't know, there's just a lot of stuff that didn't really work for me, and I'm not sure why.
I agree. A lot of it felt at the script level. One of the things with Walker is when he walks into the arena the first time, he uses what really should be considered racial slurs. He calls them ETs, he calls them snakeheads, because a lot of them have, skin textures that are not human and so could look reptilian. And even though it's a lot of different alien races being represented here, they all have a lot of latex prosthetics making their face look different. And so his general term for that is a rude one. But they don't really go anywhere with that attitude. Caliban says you have to do this with respect, and then bam. After that, he's respectful. He doesn't use words like that. And we have seen other characters in other episodes who are people of color portraying attitudes, bigoted attitudes towards other races, especially towards non-humans. And, we've seen that before. It's just this does not seem to be motivated by anything other than casual dismissal of other cultures. And he doesn't pay for it, or it doesn't play into anything in any way. It just is there and then it's gone. So I kind of wish that either A, it had been given more weight and been part of the story, or B, had not been there at all because it was just there and gone and wasn't part of the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it almost would have been better if that final fight, Gior had gotten upset, if he'd called Gior a snakehead in the ring, upsetting Gior, and then he gets pounded into an undeniable defeat or something.
Yeah.
Even if Garibaldi had at one point said, hey, that kind of terminology doesn't fly.
Yeah.
We are all aliens in space. Like,
he's sort of sizzling towards that direction, but it's not really. It's like, they all may just be snakeheads to you, but, and that's all there is. It doesn't change Smith's perspective. And we've seen in lots of movies over the years, books and other stories, somebody from outside of a culture coming in and being the best at that culture. It's usually a white character doing it, which is why it's called the white savior trope. This is not quite that. Walker Smith does not beat the Shorin, which I appreciated, that there was a draw. He stood his own. He did well. He's definitely a good fighter. He's the best of his race, as they say. He's not able to win, but he is able to take it to a draw. So I feel like that's a slightly different take on the storyline, and it just feels weird. It also feels weird that the accent from the Mutado sounds vaguely Asian, and all of the names sound like they're probably taken from Japanese. In fact, I did some looking on what might be some of the word derivations, which I'll talk about a little bit. But the idea of Asian pastiches being incorporated into a martial arts storyline, which we also associate with Asian cultures, just felt weird.
Yeah, and the Mutado was played by a Korean actor.
Okay.
So Soon Tak-o was born in Mokpo, South Korea, according to the IMDb.
Okay.
So at least his accent was not an affectation.
I haven't heard him speak naturally, so I don't know if he speaks with an accent or not.
Looking at his credits, his big one is voice acting for the animated Mulan. And it looks like from his IMDb, he started his acting career in Korea and then moved to America.
Okay.
So I strongly suspect then that the accent is natural.
Okay. And Don Stroud as Caliban, you're right, he did seem kind of sinister, but he was just weirdly wanted to help this dude out. And,
Mm-hmm.
we find a little bit of an anti-imperialism attitude, which is pretty natural. Humans come in, humans mess things up, humans do all this stuff to change our ways and take things away from us. We don't want humans here. That is a very natural attitude, and we see that a lot in our world historically towards peoples who have, imperialistically conquered lands and taken cultures and that sort of thing. But Caliban was just like, nah, this dude deserves the right to fight if he could just get his attitude right.
Mm-hmm. And the actor Don Stroud was actually pretty impressive on set.
Mm-hmm.
The story seems to have changed a few times. When he was filming this, he was blind in his right eye.
Okay.
He was blinded, according to what I found online and in the conversations. In the police reports, he said he was, people tried to mug him and he fought them off. IMDb trivia says he came to the aid of another man who was being mugged and helped fight the muggers off. But when he was on set, and the story he was telling people, as told by Larry DiTillio and by J. Michael Straczynski in two different posts, is that the intended mugging victim was a woman who was calling for help, and he stepped in. But yeah, in any event, he was, a group of 4 muggers tried to mug somebody, and he stopped them.
Mm-hmm.
Lost the vision in his right eye for it. They do really like him as a person, so he will. It's one of the cases where they reuse actors. We mentioned Ed Wasser is one of the few where he's human in 2 different roles, but we will see Dan Stroud again in another role. Since, he's kind of hard to recognize under all that makeup.
We also see Theodore Bikel come back later. He played Rabbi Koslov. And I'm looking to see, he has a hugely extensive list. He was in an episode of the 70s Spider-Man TV show. Oh, that's great. But his acting, of course, he's older in 1994. So his acting career goes all the way back into the 1940s, actually. He's been doing lots of roles for a lot of time.
Yeah, he was in My Fair Lady.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, My Fair Lady won Best Picture, and he's Zoltan Karpathy in that. He was in The African Queen with Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn. Science fiction fans, like ourselves, might know him as Worf's adopted father, Sergei Roshenko.
Oh, that's right! Another Russian character. Because it's worth mentioning that this is all Russian Jewish culture being represented here, which if you're not familiar with Jewish history, the fact that there have been different branches of that culture in different lands, there's sort of different flavors of Judaism depending upon what part of the world you're in. And so Russian Judaism is sort of its own thing, with minor differences from that and other areas of Judaism. But yeah, just scrolling through this, he voiced Aragorn in the Return of the King animated, which I don't know if you've seen that.
I haven't. Yeah. Well, we won't hold that against him.
And he'll be back later for something else. Gior, I meant to look this guy's name. He's played by James Jude Courtney. But when he's standing there, he looks like, oh gosh, I'm going to have to look the guy's name up. I thought he was another actor. James Jude Courtney was in Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends. Actually, all three of the new Halloween films. But it just says he's the Shape. So I don't know if that's like one of the people who's in the mental hospital. I've only seen the first of the new Halloween films.
I haven't seen any Halloween film.
Oh. Do you not do slashers, Blaine?
Not a huge fan of the genre. So I hear the first Halloween is one of the best of the genre, so I'll probably get around to it.
Yeah, it's pretty emblematic and iconic of the genre, yeah.
Yeah. But no, he will be back as Narn number 1 in a later episode.
Just a Narn.
He was also a boxer in Far and Away, which makes me suspect, if he keeps getting roles like this, the very physical roles. I mean, the pictures that we have for him on IMDb right now are him as, basically the Michael Myers in The Mask. So I think that's what they mean by the Shape, is they were trying to keep it ambiguous about whether or not he actually was Michael Myers in these films, at least to start with. But having that many very physical roles, and his other ones are like Thug, stuff like this, Final Hitman, I suspect he has had real life combat training, which, helps him get these roles because it looks more convincing on screen when you already know something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other notable guest star is Gregory McKinney. He was actually working fairly well, or fairly frequently in the 90s. He was Jax in the 1995 Mortal Kombat movie. He was in Eraser, Beverly Hills Cop 3, Money Train.
Oh yeah, he played Walker Smith too. I forgot to mention him. We were talking about Smith earlier.
So he's only got 24 credits on the IMDb, going from 1987 to 1998. Now, some of that is because he died on April 12th, 1998 at age 41. Looking to see if we have a listed cause of death on the IMDb right now. What I do know is that his character Walker Smith was named after Sugar Ray Robinson, whose real name was Walker Smith Jr.,
okay,
who died on April 12th, 1989. Oh, and it was a brain aneurysm was the cause of death for Greg McKinney. So yeah, he and the real person who his character was named after died 9 years apart to the day.
Well, as this episode opened, the opening scene is very light. Smith and Kozlov, say hello, say their goodbyes because after being on the flight, and then Smith has a very friendly meeting with Garibaldi, and it ends on a laugh. And just after the really big events of last week, it felt like a little bit of a pedestrian way to open an episode. But I realize that especially in this era of television storytelling, you have to come back to sort of, normal day-to-day stories. So it didn't really bother me so much. It just kind of felt like a shift. And then, of course, the episode ended up being a really big character piece for Ivanova, so it didn't really bother me that much. I just got excited because I remember that she's reading Harlan Ellison in that in her first scene.
Yes. And what was the title of that? It's listed as Harlan Ellison's autobiography. And I'm trying to remember the title.
She was laughing at it, whatever it was.
Yeah, well, Ellison chose the title of his autobiography, which he never actually intended to write. But he kept saying, well, I'll write it in the year 2000, I'll write it in the year 2000. So then they actually had the prop made.
Well, the title of his actual autobiography is A Lit Fuse. But I don't think that's the one that was on the screen.
No, it's not. And this one drove them nuts because after they filmed this episode, as we know, Harlan Ellison was involved in the show. Straczynski gave Ellison the prop, which he took around to conventions and had his fans freaking out that they missed one. You know, one of his books was out there that they hadn't read yet.
The fact that it's a fake book never even occurred to me. That's fantastic that she is reading a fake Harlan Ellison book on the screen. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I just figured it was one of his books. She's just holding a Harlan Ellison book. They can last 300 years.
Yeah, now in terms of how this was broadcast, Channel 4 in the UK didn't show this at all.
Oh.
Which was not... I don't know why, but someone posted online, T.K.O.'s main importance is to the Ivanova arc as she finally comes to terms with her father's death, and they asked JMS, do you have an opinion on C4's decision not to show T.K.O.? His only answer is, absolutely.
I do have an opinion about that. Ask me later.
Yes. And then they had originally wanted Signs Importance to lead off the break. And when they came back from the break, they wanted to go to Quality of Mercy rather than T.K.O. But Warner Brothers got that mixed up and got the order of those two episodes reversed. That's
right, because this was not coming back from the break. This was the last episode before a break. We're not having a new episode next week.
No, we'll be taking a bit of time off as the show did, because the show did, which we'll talk about in a little bit, yes. But as we know, this was on a new network. So P10 was Warner Brothers' first drive to get a network together. And what they actually had was contracts with a number of independent stations to play a certain block of programming, more than a network where they owned the TV stations. And that's going to have a big impact in a couple of years. But for now, it's on P10, and they were trying to do things differently to make their mark. And one of the things that they did differently was use different logic. Instead of having the big gripping episodes go right before break, which as we know helps keep people excited and talking and wanting to come back to see the next one, they would do the tamer episodes to get people in the habit of watching and build up. So they didn't want to just end on Signs Importance. They figured, no, that one's so gripping. If we show another new episode the next week, we'll get really high ratings on that one because it'll pull people in because they want to see more like that. Which did work for the ratings on, episode T.K.O. Didn't work so well for the ratings when it came back.
Right.
They weren't abysmal, but T.K.O. here did not make people go, ooh, I need to see what happens next, the way Signs Importance did.
Mm-hmm.
So people weren't going out going, okay, when do I want?
I did look up the Harlan Ellison book. It is Working Without a Net.
Right. Yes, thank you. So, yes, when we do come back for Grail in about 6 weeks, I believe, that one, it's better than this one. And there's definitely things to say about what's going on the set for that one as well. But
Okay.
We'll get to that a little bit later.
Kozlov is very Russian. His English is accented, and he incorporates both Russian and Yiddish into his common speech. And I wish I understood more about Russian linguistics and how family names and everything work, because even though she's Susan Ivanova, Kozlov refers to her family as the Ivanov family, and her father as Andrei Ivanov. He doesn't do the on the end. So I'm now curious, super curious, does your surname get adjusted based on your gender?
Apparently it should, which is why the Black Widow in Marvel Comics is now, they've sort of retconned it, so that they call her Romanoff almost as a nickname, and her birth name is Romanova.
Okay.
So instead of Natasha Romanoff, it's Natalia Romanova. And they've said that, yes, they gave her, when they made her a Black Widow and a spy, they listed her officially as Romanoff so that she could keep her identity, because people be looking for a guy and not a woman.
Interesting. Okay.
So they retconned it in a way that kind of sort of makes sense when, they admit that or Stanley admitted that, he just didn't know that was a thing. So he just picked a Russian-sounding last name and didn't know it would be altered because the character was female. So And originally it was just a mistake, but they managed to work it in a somewhat logical way.
Ivanova she gets such a showcase in this. We see her privacy with her emotions, her privacy with her personal life. She keeps things close to the vest in the way that she carries herself, and we've seen this before, and it's emphasized here. Sinclair didn't even know that his first officer's father had died, and that's a big deal. And so when Kozlov went to Sinclair, ostensibly on Ivanova's behalf, to ask for leave, I already felt a sense of foreboding. I was like, this is not going to go well. And I was not surprised when Ivanova took it, how she took it, had the reaction she did. Because, like she says, her emotions are her own, and she will handle them the way she chooses to handle them.
I can definitely see both perspectives on that. Yosef admits he meddled.
Yeah, he meant well. He did mean well. And that's, I think, why she's able, they're able to reconcile so quickly and easily. It's not that he did anything to hurt her. He just stepped into her life in a way that she didn't appreciate, because she is so private.
Yeah, and sometimes people do that. They,
yep.
Watching out for those they care about, and perhaps do things that could have been done in a better way.
With all love eventually restored between them. I found myself getting choked up in the scene between Ivanova and Sinclair. I'm not even sure why, but whenever they're talking about the fact that she needs to process her grief, the fact that she can't just keep going with her life, she's going to have to give these feelings some attention at some point. I don't know. It was just really touching. It was a great friendship gesture, and there was something about it that just got to me.
Yeah, Sinclair's reactions all the way through were wonderful. Mm-hmm. I think he handled everything magnificently. I find it's ironic that she's mad at Yosef saying, no, Dad tried to control me, now you're trying to control me, and the guy who gets through to her by saying, take a seat. She says, no, thank you. He says, no, that's an order. Take a seat. So he actually showed more control than anyone else did because he could act as her commanding officer.
Yeah.
But she accepts that as being part of her military career.
It's part of their dynamic. It's part of their structure. So it works there. But at the same time, even though he forces her to listen to him, once she stands resolute, he doesn't push inappropriately. He presents his point. She hears him. They go on. And like you said, I thought it was he handled his situation with her so well. And then asking permission to be involved later on with the Shiva, it was all really good.
Mm-hmm. Especially since he was already somewhat familiar with Shiva and knew the requirements.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that will come out. He was educated by Jesuits. So this is one of the episodes that hints to that, if we can give a little form to the dream there.
So the Jesuit would be a Catholic background, but would they probably have given him understandings of some of the other more dominant religious cultures?
Yeah, he's got that from somewhere. I don't know how much of that he had before Parliament of Dreams that we saw back in episode 5, I think it was,
mm-hmm.
where he just filled that corridor with representatives of all the different beliefs on Earth, because there really is no dominant one. So we've seen that, yes, he is the kind of character who respects other religions, even though he doesn't necessarily believe them.
Right.
So he's one of those ones who says, well, I know my choice is right for me. Doesn't mean it's right for you. And it doesn't mean we're not both right or both wrong, which I think is a very healthy attitude that more people should take.
In fact, kind of along those lines, whenever Kozlov is getting ready to leave the first time, you can see in his face that he disagrees with what Ivanova is doing, but he's not disapproving. He's not judging her. He's respecting her enough to accept her choice and not push the issue. There's a little bit of tension between them that's not there on the final, parting of the ways. But I just respected that from Kozlov and how he's approaching Ivanova. There, we do see a lot of the Shiva where they're talking, and they brought in a lot of, several extras to stand in as friends or friends of the family. Claudia Christian herself is not of Jewish descent, and that would be a talking point today. I don't think it was as much of a talking point, if at all, back in 1994. So even though they hired somebody to play Ivanova who was neither Russian nor Jewish to play a Russian Jewish character, based on the mores and the standards of how you hire people in 1994, I have respected how much of that culture they were able to bring to the fore here in a way that felt meaningful to the characters and meaningful to the episode, and not just a pastiche of a culture.
Yeah, and I don't think people reacted as, oh, she's not part of this culture. It was more, holy crap, for the first time we're being represented in science fiction.
Right.
That was an attitude that some people had. So, yes, Ivanova is the first Jewish character, or explicitly Jewish character, in a major science fiction production coming out of the U.S.
Very good.
So it does establish that.
Yeah. The goals of those kinds of choices have shifted over the decades as we have moved forward. So yeah, I can appreciate them bringing Jewish culture and Jewish characters to the story in 1994 in ways that had not been done before.
And they say that's why Whoopi Goldberg was so excited when she first saw Star Trek. It was the first time she'd seen black people in the future.
Right.
In any productions.
So we have, black people in dominant roles. We have, Jewish people in dominant roles. We have, of course, by the 90s and hopefully even more so by the 2020s, the kind of white dominant storytelling that has dominated, history for so much is on the retreat.
It is, and it hasn't retreated as much here as they were hoping.
Yeah.
So Walker Smith was referred to as black in the script, and generally speaking, the writers on Babylon 5 are leaving characters open to interpretation. So they're not describing, they're not saying, in some cases they're not even saying male or female, they're not saying anything about what their skin color is. And then they found out later in this season that their casting director was doing her casting the way that she had been trained to do. So at the time, if the script didn't specify, when you put out the call, you specify white male. Or if the script says just female, you specify white. So they put those labels on there. So the casting was narrower than they wanted.
The casting was narrower than the scripting. Interesting.
Yeah, and that was sort of the habit in Hollywood. That's the way casting directors were trained to do it. And when they found out that their casting director, Mary Jo Slater, was doing it that way, they did make some changes from season 2 onward.
Okay.
And again, I'm trying to emphasize that Mary Jo Slater was doing it the way she was trained to do, so she was subconsciously reinforcing the systemic racism that was in place. Right. She was not consciously excluding people. She was subconsciously doing it.
Difference between systemic racism and a person making racist choices.
Yes. And she also had a tradition of casting for major science fiction stories. So Mary Jo Slater's son Christian was a huge science fiction fan. She managed to get him cast in Star Trek VI when she was working on it.
So that's why he's on Star Trek VI. I thought Christian Slater on Star Trek? What a bizarre choice. But he's a fan. I love it. And his mom got him on the show.
And was trying to get him on Babylon 5, but and Straczynski and the others were open to it. They just didn't find a suitable part for him while Slater was working in that capacity. So we're going to see a few production people get turned over as the show progresses, which is actually really common when you look at a lot of the shows that are out there.
I did mention earlier that I thought some about the language of the Mutari and the Mutai and the Mutado. So everything sounded either reminiscent or directly related to Japanese, so I looked to see what I could find. And I'll come back to the basic muta word in a second, but a do suffix on things is often like the way of or a road. And so in some martial arts like kendo and stuff, it's like the way of the fist. So even though it doesn't mean it's not being used that way in the story, I feel like they may have chosen that as a Japanese, inflection, I think is the right word. Also, putting an E sound on the end of a noun turns it into an adjective. So the mutai was the fight, but if muta were a Japanese word, then mutai would be like, anything of or pertaining to muta, like whatever. But the word muta itself is actually, in my mind, probably a nod to Muto Kenji, who was known as the Great Muta, and he was a huge name in Japanese professional wrestling. And his career was on the rise and making new heights in the late 80s and early 90s. So anyone who had any awareness of Japanese professional wrestling or Japanese, performance martial arts at the time would have been aware of the Great Muta. And using his name as a basis for a lot of the stuff related to this, this fighting situation here seems like a natural choice. And then using Japanese inflections for some of the other words in and around that also seems like a deliberate choice. I have no one to ask, and you've read the script. I don't even know if it would have been mentioned in the script. But to me, it seems like a cool nod, since you're doing this story about fighting and you're using Asian-ish kinds of visuals, then to use some of your names based on a Japanese person in Japanese language seemed kind of cool to me.
Yeah, I don't remember any explicit reference to that. It's been a while since I read DeTilio's notes on this episode. I didn't have time to reread them before we recorded here.
Mm-hmm.
But given that Walker Smith was deliberately named after Sugar Ray Robinson, it wouldn't surprise me if there were other deliberate name homages in this as well.
Yeah.
Because he was a huge fan of boxing and getting into his fandom of mixed martial arts when this came out. As we could probably see by how the episode was influenced by it.
And just in passing, I think I misspoke earlier when I mentioned the guy's name. It was not, I think I said Muto Kenji. It's Muto Keiji. So just anyone who's trying to look that up. I did say it wrong earlier. And the last note I had also was linguistic. When Sinclair says goodbye to Koslov, he says Lehitraot, which is Hebrew for see you again. My understanding is that the Hebrew language does not like to say goodbye. So they have other ways of saying things that don't say goodbye. It's like shalom is peace and lehitraot is see you again. But there's not like a go away, you're leaving kind of farewell.
That's interesting. The only other things I wanted to mention, one thing I do want to give kudos to in part of the Walker storyline is the way that they ended the match. Because the way the Mutai was described earlier didn't make it sound like a draw was an option.
Yeah.
So I do like the way that they were directed to play it, where, one of them would take a swing and they'd both kind of sit there for a few seconds, and then the other would take a swing. So the way they were acting, it was clear that they had been at this for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, they were so exhausted and yet both still standing that the fight was boring to watch, which I think is why it was called as a draw, which strikes me as a rare thing. So I do want to say that, yes, that was very well directed to show that, yeah, these guys are they're running on adrenaline and force of will. As soon as they say the fight's over, you could probably easily see them both collapsing. So I did want to give credit to that, because we've been kind of down on that storyline.
Yeah. No, I liked that too. And the fight is intercut with the Shiva, which was probably at least an hour-long ceremony. And so the implication is that they were taking place at the same time, although sometimes TV and film plays with our perception of time. But an hour-long fight is really long fight.
Yeah.
Those are supposed to go minutes, not
the hour. So, yeah, I don't know what else to say aside from the fact that, yeah, one of the things that I noticed about this, which differs from a lot of our previous episodes, is not uncommon in our previous plot summaries, as you may have noticed, because we kind of summarize, here's all the A plot, here's all the B plot. You will generally have characters playing a prominent role in two of the plots,
mm-hmm.
and they're interacting with each other and linking up at certain scenes. I think part of the reason I was way more engaged by one than the other, not just the nature of the stories and the fact that I'm not a fan of boxing, or I'm not entertained by people beating the crap out of each other just to see who's better at beating the crap out of the other guy.
Mm-hmm.
But I think part of the reason there was a disconnect here is because there was a complete disconnect on a script level. The characters involved in one subplot never interact with the characters involved in the other. There is nothing in here that says these two subplots have to be in the same episode. And you could have edited one out and left the other one 100% intact and plugged in another subplot, which is just, it's not the way Babylon 5 usually runs. Typically, the parallel action has to be parallel in some way.
It's usually pretty, a bit more connected than that. And yeah, I just, other than, the only connection we saw really is the fact that the two men rode together on the flight. And that didn't, those first 30 seconds and then say goodbye to each other didn't even have to be in the script. It wasn't important.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, as far as the fightings, it's not that I dislike fighting shows or whatever. I mean, I can watch Rocky and enjoy it, but I just felt like there were some weird steps along the way, maybe missteps along the way, and I certainly didn't feel emotionally engaged with it. It was a story about a guest character, and the guest character's situation never resonated with me, and his connection to Garibaldi didn't resonate with Garibaldi as a character, so it just felt weird. And then within the actual narrative, there were weird storytelling choices. So yeah, I'm going to remember this as the episode with Ivanova, not the episode with Walker Smith.
Yep. Honestly, rewatching it now, probably about 20 years since I watched it the first time, because I was watching on DVD. I didn't remember the Walker half, just the Ivanova half.
And it's called T.K.O, so you'd want that storyline to stand out more. And I don't know what they could have done differently. He wants back in the ring, and this is his way to get back in the ring. But once that is stated at the beginning, I don't really feel like it's ever alluded to again. And so it's like the motivation doesn't feel relevant to the storyline. I don't know. I don't need to keep slagging off on it. It's just, I wish I had enjoyed it more. I'll say that.
Yeah.
Shall we move on to our last best hope then?
I think we can, yes.
What was your standout character or character moment from the episode?
I am torn between whether it's Sinclair meeting with Yosef or Sinclair meeting with Ivanova, about which is my favorite, just because, again, Sinclair handled this magnificently. And, as you said, yeah, we find out that he didn't even know Ivanova's father had passed away. And she was saying, I can't get away. That was her own judgment. I think in the end, I am going to go with the very end. So the end of that storyline, when she says, okay, I'm ready to return to duty, Sinclair says, great, I'm tired of double shifts. And Ivanova's response, remember that the next time Miss Sakai comes to visit, which is the sign that he's been taking time off and sticking Ivanova with the double shifts.
Yes.
So yeah, I think that's where I'm going to eventually land, is her response to that, which, ties into the larger narrative with Miss Sakai.
Whom we have not seen in quite some time, and I kind of forgot existed. Okay, so yeah.
And again, her second appearance was in Mind War, which was bumped from episode 10 to 6 by the network because it was so strong.
Okay, so it should have been more spaced out. I was also going with the Ivanova Sinclair meeting. Like I said, it had an unexpected emotional resonance with me. I just feel like his caring for her and her appreciation of that friendship, but also her need to do things her own way and like realizing that's going to be a painful road for her. I don't know, just there was an emotional reality to that I appreciated in a way that was not necessarily a good thing for the character, but a real thing for the character. So yes, that takes us on to one of my favorite parts of the show, which is our segment called Giving Form to the Dream. Since this is a spoiler-free review of Babylon 5, we do not wish to spoil ahead. However, we do like to draw attention to things in this episode that you might want to remember for later. So you mentioned that Sakai gets mentioned. Miss Sakai, Catherine was her first name?
Yep.
Catherine Sakai gets mentioned, so obviously she's still around. We'll probably see her again later. We get world building for Ivanova with her culture as a Russian Jew. And what else is here that we can keep in our back pocket?
I think you caught most of it there. I only caught that, yes, the world building for Ivanova, not just that she's a Russian Jew, but also the piece where she is now the last survivor of her immediate family.
Mm.
So both of her parents and her only sibling are dead. The exposition revealed that her brother was lost in the Earth-Benbari War, which is what inspired Ivanova to sign up for Earth Force in the first place, against her father's wishes. That was the start of the rift. So yes, Ivanova's immediate family is gone. She may have cousins, aunts, uncles, grandparents, but parents and siblings are gone. And as you said, we have Ivanova giving Sinclair some advice about how to better handle Miss Sakai's next visit. And the world building, that's it. I honestly do not remember any future reference to the Mutai.
Okay. All right, so this episode, it's the lowest rated of the series. It has very little impact on anything going forward. So sadly, this is also going to be where we leave off for a little while because I counted all 4 weeks of June. So 5 weeks from now will be the next new episode of the series, which with Grail on July 6th. We will be doing one feedback episode sometime in June, assuming that y'all are sending us feedback. But we will be taking a bit of a broadcast break in the month of June. So in the meantime, speaking of feedback, we can talk about how you can get in touch with us.
Yes, one way is to email us at Babylon5 30 years later at gmail.com using the words or the numerals, your choice.
You can send us comments on the episode postings at johnreadscomics.com, which is one of the places where the show lives.
You can also leave comments at bureau42.com.
And review us on your favorite podcatcher. We check Apple Podcasts regularly for reviews, so if you leave us a review somewhere else and you'd like us to thank you for it and read it on the air, just send us a note some other way to let us know that it's out there for people to see. We will definitely give you our appreciation here on the episode.
And the final place that you can leave comments is on the YouTube feed. I don't know how many people are planning to listen to this on YouTube. All I know for sure is that we are recording this the day before Halloween in 2022. Our show goes live on January 1st, 2024, and we somehow already have 4 subscribers. So to those 4, thank you for subscribing. And anyone else who's there listening, yes, you can leave us comments there.
Well, we are currently planning to put that feedback episode out about halfway between now and next episode. So look for that in 3 weeks on June 22nd. And then we'll be back with another review episode of the next episode of Season 1, going into the final leg of Season 1 on July 6th. So do be watching for that. And until then, thank you very much for listening.
And good eating to you.